Welcome to Serves You Right. This is Andrew, and I'm glad you can make it. If you are a server, bartender, back of house warrior, this is the spot for you. Follow me as we try to work out a couple fundamental questions. One of the main ones I've asked myself over the last couple years is whether you can truly be happy working in the service industry. I haven't landed on an answer, but that's what we're doing here. I look around to find people that are inspirational, people that inspire, people that can promote a better life, and occasionally people that can serve as a cautionary tale. So I find people and I ask them questions. What's their life like? What are they doing? And how could someone else learn from them and do something like they're doing? I'm exploring what I can find, and I hope you enjoy the journey. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please like, subscribe, and share, and let's jump right in. Today, we get a chance to talk to Nat Harry, author of Spirits Distilled, a guide to the ingredients behind a better bar. In addition to being a awarded bartender, author, Nat was just a really fantastic person to have on and talk to about spirits. My background is bar-centric, and it was a real pleasure to talk to someone else who, cared about what the items behind the bar are, what's the liquid in the glass, and also has that experience of how to interact with the guest, how to talk about spirits, and how to think through these things. We get to discuss the book, obviously, a lot of spirits, some of the nitty-gritty of even up to floor malting, and just what it is that's cool about these different spirits. There's a little eau de vie, there's a little bit of everything. Definitely enjoyed the conversation of geeking out on corn. So yeah, there you go. Without further ado, Nat Harry. All right, thanks for joining us today, Nat. So I wanted to jump right into it, and you've got a new book that just came out, and very exciting. Yeah,
totally.
So can you tell us how that come to be? And
I had been thinking about this project for a number of years, and it kind of started when I was the spirits buyer at Cask in San Francisco. And one of the nice things about that job is that I got to get invited on trips from suppliers and importers, and get to go and see firsthand how spirits are made. And that was just an amazing experience. But I think I was particularly inspired by Oaxaca. That was really like ground zero for thinking about agriculture in terms of spirits. So my first trip to Oaxaca, I kind of got a little agave obsessed. But I really started applying this sort of mindset of seeing just the farming and the physical, aspects of just moving a raw material, and applying those same questions to all spirits, just like, how, what kind of corn is that? And, what things are grown in a single season and what things take, multiple years to grow. So, I really got interested in kind of the very beginnings of how spirits come to be.
Yeah. Well, I think Oaxaca and Mezcal is the perfect spot for that.
It really is, yeah. And just it's such a physical process too. Just these huge plants that are all, harvested and moved by hand and sometimes carted around by burro. And it's very labor intensive, and you can hear about it and talk about it, but until you see it, it's like it really flips a switch, in terms of how you can kind of comprehend just the scale of it. But there's just beyond agave too, there's so much fascinating stuff that we don't talk about in terms of spirits, because we're always getting this finished product, this package, this marketing. We don't really go back much further than that as a typical consumer, I would say.
No, yeah, that's true. So I was very impressed. So what led you to lead not with the whiskey or bourbon, but with Kirsch?
That's funny. That's not the first time I've gotten that question, and
Uh,
it was kind of a roundabout way of um, I don't know. Like we had talked a lot about leading with the big heavy hitters, but we figured people are going to get there eventually. Like they're going to pick up this book, maybe for the agave, but that doesn't mean we necessarily have to lead with it. So I can't remember the exact thinking of how we got with fruit, but the organization ended up just making more sense leading with, I think, one of the most underappreciated spirits categories, which is like eau de vie, just fruit in its purest form distilled. And I kind of love that I was almost like a little bit of a happy accident where it made sense for the book, but it really got people looking at that kind of thing first, where I kind of tricked you into getting exciting about fruit spirits, which I think are they're having a little bit of a renaissance, at least in the US. There's some really cool stuff going on, but yeah,
no,
happy accident.
no, that's super cool.
Yeah.
So I had to ask. That was on my notes.
Yeah.
I do want to go back to mezcal because I feel like
Yeah.
mezcal is such a cool big topic. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Most agaves will take like 20, 30, 40 years to reach maturity, right?
So it's some of the wild agaves will take, yeah, around 30, some up to 40 years. That's typically for wild stuff and stuff like a Tempestate. Those are like the slow burn agaves. Things like espadín, which are being cultivated now for a lot of our like everyday mezcals, our margarita pours, take around maybe 8 years.
Mhm.
So there is some, wiggle room, but you have like a lot of things like TOA and stuff that might take closer to 12 years. So I would say that the average is probably more between like 10 to 15. And
Okay.
the stuff that's that really like long growth cycle stuff is we're not seeing it so much anymore, in part because it's been over harvested. It's mostly the wild stuff that was taking that long. And you're not seeing as many of those like kind of I call like the nerdy varieties that um, you know, um, again, like the Tepesate and stuff that take 30 years. So there are definitely those out there, but I would say the general average is probably closer to 15 years if you kind of average everything out. So, but that's still a really long time. If you think of it in like whiskey years, to get a 15-year bourbon, like the price you would pay for that versus the price you would pay for this, aged on the plant mezcal is like, there's no, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't really talk. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think in my head because I remembered more than a year, I think I just kind of put it, oh, it's all
Yeah.
30 years and
And a
just
lot of, I mean, there were more, I think, of those older plant expressions coming out at the beginning, like when we had all that wild agave. A lot of it was the older stuff, um, but now we're not seeing it because it's either regrowing or it's just not it's not being thought of as like maybe a sustainable way of running a business,
yeah.
which is what mezcal is becoming more of a pure commodity and less of a we make enough for the community and that's all we need kind of thing. So
Yeah,
it's
for
changing.
sure.
It's physically changing the landscape of what's going on.
I once heard a master somm describe it as it was this I think he said the sustainability of making a distillate from the coral reef. And I
Oh,
thought that was a funny way of putting it.
that really, I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that feels very accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, the a little bit before you mentioned aging whiskey for that amount of time, and
yeah.
that is something I wanted to touch on because I like the approach of you know kind of dispelling a few old like kind of rules of thumb that maybe aren't true. The color being equated to the quality,
Mhm.
yeah, older is better. So I just wanted to
Yeah,
talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
totally. I mean, I think very much those ideas are still out there, like that that a really dark color might mean an old whiskey, or, older is better. And I tasted a lot of single barrels when I was at Caskin. I tasted a lot of old, I've tasted like 30-year-old bourbons, and I've tasted 7-year-old bourbons, and I generally found that I like the younger expressions of, like, I've had amazing, like, 7 and 8-year-old single barrels that knock the socks off of something that was like 20 years old that starts to get over extracted. And it's not like a fast rule that, like, oh, older is going to be better. But yeah, it all depends on the whiskey and personal preference. But I've definitely had some 20-year bourbon that tasted a lot like the finest toothpick expression you could get. It's just very woody and pulpy, and like just probably didn't need to happen. But in terms of color too, with things like Scotch whiskey, where you have sherry barrels that impart a lot of this dark, rich color, and you have it next to like an ex-bourbon barrel, and people will look at the sherry and say, oh, this is older or better or more mature. And this light color, like, they kind of discount it sometimes. So I think there's a lot of like not understanding where the color comes from. And then there's caramel coloring, which is its own discussion.
Its own rabbit hole right there. Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, is this going to have caramel coloring? And which is still really big in Europe, as far as like just color correction, because it's sending a message to the consumer that, like, hey, you don't want bottle variation, because you don't want them to be picking bottles based on this one looks, a little darker than the other one. So yeah, there's a lot of just like understanding where the color comes from, and does age make something better? I mean, it changes it, but it's not necessarily like a value judgment kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I always tell my guests, I run a steakhouse, so age is kind of like salt and pepper. It's great on food, but you don't want to eat salt and pepper. It's exactly. You got to have a little bit something else too. So.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Well, so I wanted to ask you, you've done a lot of things. You've worn a lot of hats. So I was doing some research on you. You were a bartender by trade. Yeah. So can you kind of give us an overview of your career to where you are now?
Oh, totally. I even before that, so I started out in the hospitality service industry as a barista. And I got a little antsy with that, and I started learning about roasting coffee, and then I got a little antsy with that. And when I was working in Ithaca, New York, I was working at this local coffee place, and the folks next door had a bar, and they used to come in all the time. And I was just like, I wanted to work for them so bad. So I started out as a bar back there, and really took to it and started working as a bartender. And then when we moved out to the Bay Area, I started managing a farm-to-table spot called Revival Bar and Kitchen. And that's where I really got to kind of flex my creative muscles, do the cocktail program, make syrups, bitters, all that kind of fun stuff. And I did that for a while. And I really enjoyed that creative aspect of that. Definitely rough on the body, which is one of the reasons I sort of made the transition to retail, because I kind of hit the point where both mentally and physically I was like, I need a change before this kind of breaks me down too much. So I did miss the creativity of that, but I got to, I love learning new things and jumping into new areas. So when I switched to retail, that was, still got to use my brain to nerd out about spirits in a way that I didn't really do when I was on the bar side, because I was definitely concerned with like using good spirits, but I wasn't tracing them too far back. I was like, I want a good spirit, but now I'm going to focus on making this, strawberry syrup, these mole bitters, and this kind of thing, and really thinking more about the final cocktail than, the production of cognac or something like that. So it was fun to be able to just deep dive into spirits and chat about that with folks when I was working the floor retail wise. But yeah, I kind of ran the whole the whole gamut of beverage for a while.
Yeah. Are you still doing the retail side?
I am not. I'm kind of part time working for importer called Craft Distillers,
Mm,
which
okay.
is Ansley Cole, and they've got some great agave. But I'm not really working retail right now. The book ended up being this all encompassing project where I
Mm.
was like, oh, I'll have time to do this and that while I'm writing the book, but
Nope.
not so much. No, I did not calculate quite correctly for that, but so yeah, now it's kind of recalibrating and seeing what's next. Yeah.
Yeah. What the future brings.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like another big change. I've written some articles. I've kind of like sort of moving maybe to the writing side, but yeah, it's nice to be in a place where you have a lot of options, but also it's kind of a weird place to be too. It's like a
Yeah. Especially if
career
you're used.
career limbo. Yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, because you also do spirits judging, correct?
I do. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
that is really fun. I got involved in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition during the pandemic, and super nervous my first year. I was like, I had that big imposter syndrome, like all these big industry figures, both local and nationally, were there. And it took me a couple years, I think, to feel really confident. And now it's my favorite time of year. We get to see like some of my favorite people, and it's just really interesting to get to taste all these different spirits and categories that I might not normally seek out, like Baijiu and just like a wide variety of liqueurs and things like that. But it's really fun. Yeah,
yeah. How does one become a taste? I'm sure
yeah,
many people at home are like me, where I I'm more of the wine side of things. So I've gone through the Court of Master Somms and I'm working on my advanced. But
oh,
even at
nice.
that level, I am not comfortable. Like I constantly question whether or not I'm a good taster. And I'm sure most people
Yeah,
listening too are like, I don't know. So how
totally.
did you learn and how did you get into that?
Practice, repetition. Honestly, just having tasted a lot. Like I tasted over the course of being a bar manager and a retail buyer, there's just taste, like so much tasting, so many like reps coming through, bringing you things. You taste good things, you taste bad things. At some point, you're gonna taste. You sort of reach this caliber where I would joke that at cask they kind of select what things they're gonna bring to you because you're not a big take everything store. You're gonna be more selective. We only have a certain number of spaces, so you get used to tasting a slightly higher caliber of spirits, and then sometimes when you taste things that are not made as well, you're like, oh, I forgot that this is this can happen. I forgot that these flaws can exist. And so just a wide like tasting as much as possible is
Mm,
really, I think, the key. It's not even you don't even have to have the vocabulary. It's more of just the experience and understanding, like, oh, hey, this is bitter, this is sweet, this is pleasant, this is not, this alcohol content is creating a heat that is unpleasant, or maybe it is, it's balanced. So it's just, I think, the matter of like exposure to a variety of spirits and kind of consistently tasting things. So practice, I suppose, and
okay.
remembering a lot of spitting. There's a lot of spitting.
Yes, yes. That is something that needs to be repeated.
Yeah, yeah, especially with
Uh,
the SF Spirits competition. Like at the end of the day, you just are absorbing alcohol into your mouth, and
mhm.
it can be an intense first couple times.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Because I've done different wine tastings that at the end are palate fatiguing. So I can only
yeah,
imagine spirits is, I'm sure that, I mean, 80 proof, you know?
yeah. Ibuprofen. You're like, did I have a drink? And I'm like, no, I just absorbed just absorbed
Mhm.
things in my cheeks today. Yeah,
So it really is just pattern recognition,
I
essentially.
think
Just,
so. Yeah, pattern
Okay.
recognition. I mean, it helps to have things like vocabulary and like, fancy tasting notes, but it really just comes down to, yeah,
Mhm.
pattern recognition. True.
Is there something analogous to the way the wine world has like blind tasting for spirits?
Um, you mean like saying these things, lead me to believe this is a Chablis from, you know,
Yeah, would you ever have a flight where it's like I'm pretty sure that this is a like mid-level cognac and this one
yeah,
is probably yeah. I'm
there
thinking
might,
cognac gin and rum like those are pretty
yeah,
distinctive, but
not not as I can't think of one that's like an organized thing. I mean, I think folks
Mhm.
do that on their, own time, like as a sort of a study group kind of thing, but I don't know. I can't think of one that exists in a more
Mhm.
formal kind of, yeah,
Well,
thing, although that would be super fun and
I think
probably
the
very helpful.
lines between like rum and whiskey are more clearly delineated than like a Grenache and a like I feel
Yeah,
like there's a more of a divide there that it might be easier actually.
totally, totally. Although
Yeah.
sometimes they can, I've had spirits that have really fooled me, especially when you start to get in some of these like barrel aged things where you're like a whiskey aged in a rum cask, and you get into some murky
Mm,
areas where those lines blur a little bit. But if
yeah.
you were not trying to trick anyone necessarily and just come in with like a straight bourbon and then like a Scotch whiskey and those sorts of things, those ought to be
Yeah.
very delineated. Yeah.
For sure. I
Oh.
I did have someone once pour me I think it was a pour of Jack Daniels blind. I think I did get confused on it. I think I said, "Is this a aged rum?" Because there's that
Mhm.
fruity like banana character that
Yes,
instantly I kind of went to like maybe this is I don't know, and I doubted
totally.
myself. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. There are some like overlapping characteristics that exist with a lot of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got us on a tangent there.
Right.
uh, I did want to ask too. So, your work with the USBG, I was
Mhm.
wondering, what that role is like, and yeah, what the community out there is like.
That is a fairly, so I've been a USBG member since I moved to the Bay Area about 14, 15 years ago, but never really had the time or energy or felt maybe even comfortable being a part of the community until recently. When I first moved out here, there was it was like the peak of the mustachioed speakeasy kind of vibe, and everyone was like too cool for school. And so I wasn't like super into finding a lot of community here because it felt very, I don't know, intimidating and was not my kind of vibe. But a lot has changed. The pandemic has changed things even further, and so I decided to get involved in the USBG, and they kind of revived this position that I have they haven't actually had it for a while, which is the director of education. And I think the former director was Naya White, and that was like 8 or 9 years ago. So we're kind of reviving the education program. Every year there's a big national education sort of summit where each local chapter puts together really cool programming for a couple of days or the week, um, a little in a bigger scale than you might usually do throughout the year. So you have to get guest speakers, you'll have classes. We just recently started a book club, so we'll have like authors come in, talk about their book, do a book signing. So we're just trying to get people kind of interested in some of the educational aspects that maybe some of the younger bartenders don't know exist for the Bartenders Guild, because it's a lot of the old guard trying to revive it and getting the young folks interested in it. So basically, like rebuilding community, but it's a cool role because it's definitely all about learning and bringing folks together through a sort of shared interests and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've
Yeah,
always really really loved the USBG. They do great events. They're a
same.
big support for the community. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I definitely have enjoyed, being involved with those guys.
yeah. So yeah, like we said before, lots of hats here.
So many.
uh, Going back to your book, what was your favorite part, or like what was the part that really stood out to you? That's like, if there's one thing that I could encourage everyone to go out and buy this book for this part, this is what you really need to dive into.
Oh gosh, that's a hard question.
Or it could be a couple. Yeah, it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
just one.
well, this isn't quite answering your question, but one of my favorite parts of writing the book was finding out that I was interested in certain things I didn't think I would be interested in.
Mm.
So I was a little like everyone in this area, like when they come in to the shops and stuff, they want to talk about one of two things: American whiskey, particularly bourbon, and Japanese whiskey. And so I started to kind of get tired of talking about those things, especially because the level of depth was pretty much like I want X, Y, and Z brand and X, Y, and Z age, and that's sort of the level of intensity that folks were interested in. So
My brother
I
told
got
me it was good, and that's what I want. Yes.
yeah, exactly. And no one
Yes.
wanted to talk about this thing from this cool place. And so I got a little jaded with American whiskey, but when I went down the rabbit hole, I got really interested in corn. So that's been one of my favorite topics, and I don't know if everyone will be as passionate about corn as I was, but I've been collecting corn whiskeys, and I wrote an article for Imbibe last year about corn after I went to American Distilling Institute has this yearly I can't even think of what it's called conference, and they had one in Missouri a few years ago, and there was a corn whiskey class, and I was like, oh, I have to that class is calling to me, and I went out there, and I was like, I could not get nerdier about a subject, so I ended up taking some of that fodder and writing this article. But yeah, I got really into corn. And so that kind of revived my love for like whiskeys and American whiskeys and that sort of thing, looking at it from a different lens, approaching it from a different way, and just like kind of knocking off the dust off of some of those subjects. Um, and I think the second thing I was really kind of, I think more people should maybe read about, especially if they're into Scotch, is malting and barley and that kind of thing. I think that's really fascinating. The process of the sort of resurgence of floor malting in the U.S. and in Scotland. Really interesting, fascinating process, and just understanding how it works because there's a lot of labor that you don't see there as well. But those are probably my two big things where I was like, I didn't expect to be so interested in these things, but I was, and so hopefully that comes through for the folks reading it, that they will go on that journey with me and also be excited.
Corn and malting, yes.
Yeah,
For the uninitiated out there, what
yeah.
is malting? So I know me and you know, but
Oh, totally.
yeah.
So malting is so we're using for Scotch and single malt whiskey. You're using barley, and barley has to be doesn't have to be, but it is typically malted to have these sugars to break down. So the malting is basically you're sprouting barley, and then you're stopping the germination before it can come to an actual plant. So once it turns into a plant, that energy, those sugars are going to be stolen. So you're tricking the seed into sprouting, and then you're shutting off that germination a couple days later, and then you roast or toast it, so you get those malty flavors. So when you have like a really dark malt or a malt for beer, for example, like a black beer, you're toasting or roasting that malt like you would like a coffee. So
For sure.
but yeah, it's a interesting process.
I definitely think anyone listening, so you definitely made that sound a lot easier than I think it is if you. So I would definitely encourage you to look up the process of malting and pictures, especially floor malting that you mentioned earlier. It's
Yeah,
such a labor intensive process, but
and a
yeah.
lot of it from like the bigger companies too is automated now. It takes place in these big like kind of vacuum tube looking things. Like it's a
Mhm.
huge automated thing. So it's really cool to have this like hands-on, like the floor malting is so kind of getting back to the roots of it. And, whether you argue that the flavor is better or not, there's definitely this connection, which is one of the things that attracted me to agave spirits, is this connection to food and this connection to what we're putting in our bodies.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, I think Lefroy does floor malting. I don't know offhand who in the U.S. does floor malting. Is there anyone?
There's two. Todd Leopold does floor malting at Leopold's Distillery. He has a small operation, and he's been doing that for a few years. And then we've got a floor malter here in Alameda, that I think is the biggest in the U.S. And there's a place in New York, really small distillery, and I can't remember the name of them now, but they're doing some floor malting. So there's a handful, but a
Just
small
here and
handful.
there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Leopold
but
is a great producer,
oh
actually.
my gosh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyone
And he's
comes to the restaurant, we have their lime cordial in one of our cocktails,
nice.
actually.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't
Yeah.
tried that yet. I went out there and visited a few years ago when I was doing research, and it was so fun to talk to him because he's just a wealth of information.
Hmm.
And yeah, you could just spend days with him and it's not, we fill notebooks of info, and yeah, it's super
Yeah.
cool.
No. Yeah, his stuff is great. I do not imagine that any person in the world would drink that lime cordial by itself, but in a cocktail, it's awesome.
Absolutely.
It,
Yeah.
it'd be too intense by itself. I couldn't see it. I did want to talk to, in doing a little bit of research about you, I came across an article, I think it was 750, when you were talking about the language used in wine terminology.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I had to chuckle with your reaction to the word smooth.
Oh my God.
So I, I
Yeah.
I think that you probably think about this word the same way I do, but would you mind kind of talking about that?
Yeah. Smooth is one of those. Well, that was the whole sort of impetus for the article was, we'd be in the basement at the shop and joking about how folks are like, that's their favorite. A lot of consumers, it's like their favorite way to describe something is smooth. Um, and there was a lot of like, smooth is not a flavor. And it's true, it's not a flavor. But I think what wasn't getting brought up when we were joking around is that smooth is a texture, and texture is very important when tasting anything. And some of the, like when you're talking to someone and you're using these proper words or these words that you've been taught are, I don't know, the correct, there's like this correct way, which I think alienates so many folks when you're kind of being, essentially you're just being a little bit snooty, right? Because you're gatekeeping with your vocabulary. And I could describe something all day to someone, and then I would be like, okay, what I'm trying to say is this whiskey is smooth, and then they're like, oh, I understand what you're saying. And so
Hmm.
it's just meeting people where they are, and it's no one's going to have the level of vocabulary that you're going to have about something you're passionate about, no matter what it is. Like if you're into guitars, you're going to start rattling off stuff about guitars, and I'm going to not know what you're talking about. So just, and the whole reason we're doing this is because we are excited about it, and we want to teach people, and we want to get other people excited. So just use language, or it'll be like, hey, sometimes for instead of saying this word, we like to say this word, and you can still communicate and teach without being like, this is the way we do things. And so it really originally started as a blog post before I pitched it, and they did take out some of my snarkier jokes, but I think that like there's no wrong language to use when you're trying to communicate about something. Like I think you can just try to find the common ground. But I really come back around to smooth as being like, I think it is an okay word to use because it is okay, and it's okay to talk about texture, as long as we recognize what we're talking about too. So
Yeah.
but yeah,
See,
it's funny.
the problem I have there, and this is something that I think is true in the whiskey world, true in the wine world, teasing out what the guest is trying to say when they say smooth. It's kind of
Yes.
like when the guest says like they like a fruity red wine.
Uh-huh.
I always have to think, is it that they like wine that is ripe but dry and
Hmm.
they detect that fruit, or is it that they like the jammy Zinfandels that have a little residual sugar and that's how they're describing
Yeah.
fruity? Smooth, because it's so ambiguous, can
Yeah.
encompass low alcohol all the way up to well integrated, and
Or sweet. I usually, when I am met with that, like smooth, and I'm not sure what they're talking about, I usually just counter it with a follow-up question. I'm like, oh, do you mean in terms of this, or do you mean in terms of sweetness, or in terms of flavor, or like, so usually I just counter that with a follow-up question to kind of flesh out what they are talking about, and to make sure we're on the same page. Are we talking about, you don't like cast strength bourbon because there's a lot of heat, so a 40%, would be smooth comparatively.
mm,
But yeah, usually just follow up questions, the same kind you would when someone orders a cocktail, but they're not really sure what they want, and you're like, oh, spirit forward or citrusy and refreshing. Like it's just kind of, there's a dialogue.
yeah. When you say classic, are you talking mojito or Manhattan? Sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
totally.
sure.
Yeah.
I like that. Do you ever miss bartending?
I do. I do. And I have taken a couple like fill-in shifts here and there over the last 5 years, and have definitely, I think, felt my age. Bartending in your
Mm,
40s versus bartending in your early 30s, big difference. But I do miss it. I miss just the kind of like, I miss chatting with folks and like providing this experience, and having a little creativity time too as well. But I don't think I could ever go back to it full time.
mm.
But, but yeah, I do miss it a little bit.
No, yeah, I feel that. So I'm just managing now instead of my background because I was always a bartender and
Oh,
all I do
nice.
is I walk around and say hello to people and I'm
Yeah,
still tired from yesterday. So I can
right.
I can only imagine if I was shaking cocktails for 8 hours.
Totally. Like grab an ice, and yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we used to have stairs at our at the bar at Revival. There were stairs, and we had like
Mm,
a dumb waiter for like heavy stuff and ice. But I would go up and down those stairs like a dozen times at least a shift, to get
mm.
something that we forgot downstairs, or grab a bottle or something like that. And I was like, it was such a intense. I was in very good shape at the time. It was very
Yeah.
intense.
Have you ever been to Santa Fe Coyote Cafe?
I have not.
No. It's where I bartended probably 12 years ago, but their
Mhm.
outside bar in the summer, there's stairs and no elevators. So we would
Oh,
when the keg went out on a Friday at 7, we were walking up the stairs with it and I was
man.
definitely in a lot better shape then too.
Yeah. Boy, yeah, my back is cramping up just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So the only other thing that I did want to make sure to ask you about, and then I'll follow up with just a couple questions and let you go. I don't want to take up too much of your time today. Um, Jeffrey Morgenthaler gave you a great shout out. I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Jeffrey Morgenthaler. When I was a baby bartender, I used to read his blog, and it was just so approachable, and he talked about everything from like, fishing a lime out of the drain at the end of the night to making a really good, amaretto sour, all those sorts of things. Like it was just everything about bar life, and it didn't feel like it felt like it was for everyone. It was just, it was very approachable. And so yeah, I was a big fan and very delighted to get his little shout out for sure. And they say like don't meet your heroes, but he's such a delightful human being. I am so glad to have met him and known him, and like just chat. and he's still putting out, like, every once in a while, like, oh, hey, I made this syrup calculator, and he puts it out, for folks to in the industry to use. It's just like giving to the industry after a lot of years, and not being like, it's so easy to kind of get jaded and grumpy, and when you're a front facing person, like, it's, I don't know. So it's such a refreshing thing to see someone like that who's just uplifting the industry, but then to get, a little stamp of approval is the right word, but just a little, little, just brings a little joy. But yeah, that was really exciting for me. That was like pat, 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 pat for myself.
Yeah, no, I saw that and I was, yeah, I was the same way when I was going through bartending, being a bar back, reading his
Mm.
blog. It's funny you
Mm.
mentioned the Amaretto Sour because
Oh my gosh.
yeah, that is one of the classics, right? Just put a little overproof bourbon in there, balances it back out, like
Mhm.
yeah. So
Game changing. Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
really, really awesome. So you know, for someone out there that hasn't read your book yet, what are some of your spirit recommendations from it that you really like? If you only had a handful to pull out, what are some of the top ones that stand out for you?
Oh gosh, in terms of like a brand or a particular producer,
Sure, sure, or
yeah,
whatever's top of mind. Yeah.
totally. I think the first thing that popped into my mind, because we were talking about floor malting, is Kilhoman for Scotch, which is I think they're still the newest distillery on Isla. They've been around about well, more than 10 years now. I want to say 14 or 15 years, but those guys make some really good whiskeys, and they make every year they have a special release that's all grown by them on the island. So that is really cool. And then they do floor malting for a big portion of their whiskeys, and particularly this whiskey they do every year that's all grown there and all malted there. So Kilhoman is a good one. Um, oh my gosh. I would say
Is this like having a kid in a candy store?
no, yeah, or it's like, what's your favorite book? And you're like, I've never read a book in my whole life. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we
Let me
started with mezcal. Is there any big mezcal that we need to take a look at, or?
yeah, let me just poke in here. That is, you're right. It's hard. So mezcal was one where we had to cut recommendations because I had so many for tequila and mezcal. Most of the areas I was pretty much like, okay, 10, 10, 5 here. They don't make a lot. But at mezcal, they were like, okay, you need to whittle this down to
Hmm.
uh, a manageable amount. Um, so a couple agave spirits that I like producer wise. Ray Comparo. Um, those guys do some really cool stuff. I've been out to visit them. Mezcal Vago they make this agave that, or this espadín that is as a third distillation where they add corn. It's an elote mezcal, and it's obviously combining my two favorite things, which is corn and agave. And that's really fun. So I love those guys. Oh yeah, in the candy store. Real Monero. They do clay pot distillation. Really fun stuff. A lot of special releases throughout the year. And going back to fruit, there's a distillery in, I hope I'm remembering this right, Chicago, Ryan Hall, and they do a lot of cool fruit distillates. They're almost exclusively focusing on eau de vie. They kind of, I think, made their mark with this mango eau de vie, where someone was like, "Hey, we got these mangoes. They're gonna go bad. Can you use them?" And it was such a hit that now they do it every year, and they source their own mangoes and everything. And it's but they do, like a kirsch. They do all kinds of stuff, but then they do some fun stuff. Like I think they have a pineapple now, but it's like all fruit spirits, and I think they were doing like a pommeau for a bit, which was cool. But for like, there's some cool stuff going on for like U.S. fruit spirits that I think is worth seeking out. But yeah, I mean, there's so much cool stuff, I think, going into like the smallest, just like a small shop and looking around and asking questions is a good way to find something new and fun.
No, that's some good advice, actually. So anyone listening, all of those, I'll try and go through them and get links so we can have those in the show notes, just so everyone didn't have their pen and paper handy. We'll have that for you. Yeah, just to kind of wrap it up today, the listener today, where could they go to learn more about you? And where can they go to get the book and all that?
All right, so the book is you can get it at your favorite local store because it's through a big distributor. You can have it ordered. So if you have a little local store, you can ask them to order a copy. The easiest way is through the Amazon, which we don't love right now, but
thanks, Bezos. But yes, yeah.
Right. If you're like, hey, I live out someplace where there's no, cool little bookstore or whatever, and you need to do that. Like, there's no wrong way to order a book. Locally here, Cask has it, and Omnivore Books in San Francisco carries it. There's a place in New York called, I think it's New York Kitchen and Letters that's carrying it right now in New York City. But yeah, if you go into any of your favorite bookshops and just order a copy, they'll order a copy for you. And also, it's in the number of libraries too, so you can check your local library. I think there's like 14 libraries.
That your local library picks up this book.
Yeah, you can ask, you can request as well if it's not there. But yeah, absolutely, and yeah.
Where should they go to find you? Are you online? Or?
I am online. You can find me on Instagram at Drinkopotamus. And I also have I have a website that I need to update more often than I do, but it's natharry.com, and it also has links to where you can buy the books as well. So if you just go to natharry.com, there'll be a book. Where can I get your book? Click, easy. And yeah, I'm not very good at social media these days, but I am mostly on it. I am mostly on Instagram if I am anywhere.
Well, that's probably good for your mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Nat, it was a pleasure to talk to you today. I thank you for making the time, and I think I'm going to have to go get some mezcal.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. If you enjoyed this, please leave a review, like, share. The more people that we can reach, the more people we can help, and the more people we can bring this message to, a message of hope and possibilities in the service industry. Everyone who listens, thank you. You are my people. Keep rocking on and have a great service. And please come back and listen again. We send out new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. How about that? All right, see you soon.